Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Monday Morning Meatballs Podcast, a weekly show full of subjective sports takes stated objectively.
We're your two co-hosts, Connor and Patrick Cunningham, two brothers who love nothing more than shouting unqualified sports opinions into the ears of anyone who will listen.
At our core, we're just two small, round balls of seasoned beef, meatballs per se, and we hope by listening to our show, someday you'll be one too.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of this podcast. I'm joined with my co-host once again, Connor Cunningham.
Hello.
I am Patrick Cunningham. Today, we are going to be talking about the NFL draft, the Bears' options they have with the 1 and the 9, some of the things they could do, and then we're also going to be recapping some of the big free agency moves that went on in the past couple days. Yeah, so let's get right into it. I think the blockbuster move that happened at 9:30 on Friday, I believe, we traded a 4th-round pick for, was it Friday or Thursday? It's Thursday, right?
I think it was Thursday. Could be wrong about that.
Thursday. We traded a 4th-round pick for Chargers wide receiver, superstar wide receiver, Keenan Allen. And this, for me, I feel like we talked about it a little bit in the last episode, saying a trade target for the Bears would be going out and getting a blockbuster receiver like a T. Higgins or a Keenan Allen. So it's very exciting to see Poles kind of wake up from his slumber in free agency and actually make a huge splash with this trade. Super excited. We talked about with Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen was a huge contributor to Justin Herbert's early career success. So I think when you're bringing in a receiver like Caleb Williams, a young guy, having an older veteran receiver that is clearly, I mean, last year he had 1,200 receiving yards, over 100 catches, a dominant receiver. Having someone like that, in addition to DJ Moore, I mean, it's looking like a perfect landing spot for a young quarterback. And even if we somehow decide to keep Fields, I think Fields will have so many more weapons than he's had in the past. So overall, I just think it's a fantastic move. Super excited to see how he does.
Yeah, super excited about it. So currently the Bears have 4 remaining picks in this draft. We traded the 4th-round pick, which is the 110th pick in the draft. So King Poles, not a lot of draft capital to work with left. Allen's going to be due $23 million in 2024 too. So that kind of halves a lot of the cap space that we have left. I wouldn't expect us to make any more big moves left in the offseason, just considering we still have rookie contracts that we need to sign. Allen will be 32 by the start of the next season, but despite his old age, he had 108 receptions last year. Over 1,200 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, and was a Pro Bowler. So it's a dude who's still got juice left. He can still play at a high level, and he's a guy who, when you watch him, you feel like he's always open, still making spectacular catches. So definitely excited for it. Poles really came out of the blue here. It was 9:30 p.m. Kind of felt like the rest of the GMs had gone to sleep, but Poles is still there clacking away, grinding. So it's nice to see that we've gotten some movement going and made an acquisition.
Yeah, so I got a couple questions with this acquisition. For one, I would say how Keenan Allen and DJ Moore will pair together. I think that'll be an interesting thing because looking on paper, I wouldn't see a clear wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2. I would see them as both alpha, like 1A, 1B type players. I think the difference in their skill set, DJ Moore, I think, is more of an explosive, big body receiver, where Keenan Allen has become or is a route technician. Really is a great route runner, always getting open. So I think that's how they're going to play together. But then the main question I wanted to ask was, Connor, what do you think the future for Keenan Allen as a Chicago Bears is after this season? Do you see us re-signing him to a future bigger contract, or do you think this is a one-and-done situation? What do you think the deal is?
Yeah, great question. I feel like, at least in my opinion, yeah, he is going to be 32 years old, but he's still a guy who plays at a high level. You saw Mike Evans just signed recently a pretty long-term extension with the Bucks. So I think guys his age can still definitely have like a few years left in the tank. I'll say for Keenan Allen's game, he's a guy who, like you said, he's a really excellent route runner, similar to DJ Moore. But he's not necessarily like a breakaway speed kind of guy. And it's not like he's in that sense, it's not like he has speed to lose as he gets older. It seems like his game more relies on his route running and his abilities to get open and less dependent on his athletic abilities. So, not to say that he's getting ancient, but I feel like as he ages, his game and his strengths will remain the same. So I feel like he's a guy we could get a few more years out of. I would expect after this year, depending on how the season goes, I wouldn't be surprised if we signed him to a 2 to 3 year extension. Obviously less than $23 million a year, but I think he's a guy who could continue to be on this roster following the 2024 season. And just to hit on another thing, I thought it was interesting where the Chargers are now, considering that the Chargers now have gotten rid of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. They have stripped the receiving core down to just Quentin Johnson and I believe
Josh Palmer.
I can't even think. Yeah, Josh Palmer as a receiving core. So they had a lot of guys that they needed to re-sign. Also got rid of Gerald Everett recently.
And Austin Eckler. They got rid of everyone.
Totally stripped down. I guess Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, expensive players to retain, and then the Herbert contract is probably weighing on them. But I feel like now at the 5th pick, they're entering an odd stage, probably going to take a receiver there. But I feel like the Chargers as a whole, with Harbaugh coming in, are kind of an interesting team to look at right now. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. It really feels like they're set back a couple years now, which is hard to see with a quarterback like Herbert. That's such a dominant quarterback that you'd love to build a franchise around. But I don't know. Thankfully, we're the ones getting the receivers, not giving them away. So that was the big acquisition we've made since our last episode. For context, we're recording this on Saturday, March 16th. But some of the other moves that we've made, on Wednesday, we signed Matt Pryor, an offensive lineman for the 49ers. We signed Brett Rippon, quarterback, who's going to end up being a backup quarterback. And then we signed Amen, the linebacker for the Chargers. I would say the Chargers.
Bong Bamiga. Yeah. Say that name with some heart in it.
Didn't even want to try that name. But those two, Brett Rippon and then Amen, seem both like a special teams guy and a backup. Matt Pryor seems like he has more experience under his belt. He's played previously for the Colts with Matt Eberflus. But, I guess these don't seem like crazy signings or huge impact signings. What are your thoughts on him, Connor?
Yeah, I mean, depth is depth. It's hard to get super jacked up about some of these players. I was doing a little research on Ogbong Bamiga. He's from Canada, and he had a kind of a cool story getting to the NFL. Or I guess his cool story was being from Canada, and I thought that was interesting. But Brett Rippon, famously, Boise State quarterback, journeyman quarterback is correct, but he's had struggles at, producing quality stats in the past. So he's not a great quarterback, and it'll be interesting to see where he fits in the QB room. I know for fantasy, he's always a guy that when you see him pop up on the report, you're a little worried about your receivers. So that'll be interesting. And then Matt Pryor, again, another depth piece for the offensive line. I feel like we saw last year the Bears did deal with depth issues a lot throughout the season. So always adding, quality or at least experienced veterans on the offensive line or across the roster is almost never a bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess Brett Rippon has been on, when you talk about journeyman, you'd think about over several years, but Rippon's been on 4 teams in the last year, which is not the best sign of poor play. Yeah. Okay, so moving on past that, Thursday, March 14th, we signed Jake Curhan, offensive lineman for the Seahawks, 26 years old. He started in 9 games, played in 29 total games. Seems like another depth piece. And then we signed Coleman Shelton, offensive lineman for the Rams. He seems like a guy that will be competing with Ryan Bates for our center position. Not another huge signing. So center position seems like one that's going to be I feel like we talked about it last week, that it's a position that you can kind of hide behind. If you have a great offensive line in general, you can have a mediocre center. But that seems like we've signed 2 presumed centers. I think those might be the answer, unless we go try to find someone in the draft in the later rounds. What do you think, Connor? Do you think Shelton and Bates are going to be the 2 people competing for the starting job, or do you think this position is still left unanswered, still left to be figured out?
Well, I feel like at this point, signing 2 free agents, I wouldn't expect us to sign more interior offensive linemen as the offseason goes on. I feel like we're pretty solid there. I think Shelton, he did start with the Rams last year. Or I think in the past 2 seasons, he's played in, I think, 30 games for the Rams. So he's played a decent amount of games for the Rams. I think he's a guy right now who's projected to fill in as the starting center. Bates wasn't necessarily a starter for the Bills last year. But Shelton's a guy who has like starting experience. So I think he's a guy currently who is filling in for our, I think Shelton is going to be our starting center going into the season unless something drastic happens. But I think he's a quality player. I think fine with having him filling the center role right now. And I think it was a good signing.
Yeah, heck yeah. Pro Football Focus 2023 17th ranked center. So he's got room to grow in 2023 17th ranked center. So he's got only up from here. And then in 2022 he gave up 11 pressures and 1 sack. So can't say I know too much about offensive line stats, but 1 sack seems pretty good. Okay, so those were the big free agency moves that we made since our last episode. I think we recorded on Wednesday.
Just to highlight one more, the return of Dante Pettis. He is returning to the roster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He most famously scored a touchdown against the 49ers during that rain game where Justin Fields, it seemed like Dante Pettis had snuck onto the field when he caught that touchdown and that people had forgotten about him. But he is back on the team. He was really a part of those 2022 dark years of the Bears and receiving core. Nasimba Webster, Byron Pringle era, but glad to see him back. Glad to see he feels comfortable, found a role in Chicago. Always glad to see players return.
Yeah, kind of a counter argument to the Caleb Williams thing. We're kind of reuniting Justin with one of his former weapons of Dante Pettis.
True.
Kind of makes you wonder what polls he's got cooking up there. But I just saw that highlight tape or that clip. It's not a very extensive highlight tape, but that clip of that Dante Pettis touchdown. And it was literally like everyone on the entire field had forgotten Dante Pettis was playing. And it was such a sick play. Yeah. So, I'm glad you brought it up. I'm sorry, Mr. Pettis, for forgetting about you.
It's okay.
But, okay. So now we're going to transition into the bulk of the episode where we're going to be talking about the NFL draft. Bum, bum, bum. Ooh. So, as we mentioned already, the Bears, with the trade with Keenan Allen, we lost one of our picks. We lost our 4th round pick, so we now only have 4 picks coming into this draft. But what is more important is the first 2 picks we have. It's the number 1 overall pick and then the number 9 overall pick. So I think this draft preview that we're going to be going over different scenarios for those first 2 picks. And honestly, at least on my end, what we're going to do with that second pick, because the first pick, unless we trade it, seems pretty locked in on who it would be. I feel like it's pretty locked in. It would be a Caleb Williams move unless we trade it. So my focus is going to be on the 9th pick, what we're going to do with that, what needs to happen for certain scenarios to play out, and just what I would be excited about, what I think is going to happen, and how this draft is going to be defining for the Bears season for, I don't want to say decades or centuries to come, but certainly years.
You can say that.
To come. Yeah, we might say that. Yeah. Okay. The Bears, we've talked about in the free agency, the things that we did not meet, we did not address. We did not address edge. We did not address, obviously our QB, I guess, is still left to be determined. We addressed the wide receiver, but that still leads to some options for the 9th pick for how we can fill those holes. So the first option, and I think the most exciting option for me, is we still, despite having Keenan Allen, we still at the 9 find a receiver of the top 3 and draft a young receiver. Either, very unlikely, or it's impossible to be Marvin Harrison Jr. It's not going to happen. But if a Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze falls to the 9, either through maybe the Giants take J.J. McCarthy or some team trades into the top 5 to take a quarterback. Otherwise, it might be difficult for a wide receiver to fall to us. But I'd be very excited if we could get one of those receivers, because I think with DJ Moore being 27 and Keenan Allen being 31, drafting a young receiver that can learn and grow from those 2 veterans, I think would set up a Caleb Williams or a young quarterback to grow and thrive for years and years to come, where if Keenan Allen, we don't keep him after this year, potentially, and then DJ Moore is not a 10-year solution, right? But having a receiver, drafting a receiver now and developing him into a stud, I think would be such an exciting move. And it's something the Bears haven't done in the past. I feel like we usually don't have huge wide receiver talent. We usually rely on signing, your Brandon Marshalls, or we sign a DJ Moore, or we go get a Keenan Allen. We don't necessarily draft stud receivers, except infamously Kevin White, who drafted Alshon Jeffrey. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Connor, on a receiver at the 9?
Oh, yeah. So last time drafted a receiver within the top 10, Kevin White. I think he's still in the league right now. So, jury's still out on that bust label. But, I think at the 9, wide receiver fits in more as a luxury pick, especially considering just the bigger need that we have elsewhere on the roster. But I'll still say that from a value perspective, I think if Neighbors or Odunze fall to the 9, I think that the talent that we would get from those players versus taking the top edge rusher there, I would rather have that talent there of taking the receiver. You can see how quickly receiver rooms can fill up and how quickly they can be depleted. I mean, look at the Chargers where they lost Mike Williams and Keenan Allen so quickly, and Eckler as well. And you know what? Teams are able to draft excess receivers anytime they want. It's usually a good idea, right? When the Cowboys had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, they still took CeeDee Lamb in the draft, high in the draft, when people didn't really expect it. And that might have been a luxury pick when they took him in the first round, but CeeDee Lamb is the guy who's still there and has turned into one of the best receivers in the league. So, the league that we are in now, pass catchers are always valuable. So you can never have enough pass catchers. And I think if we were to draft Odunze or Neighbors here, we legitimately would have the best receiving core in the league, or at least a top 3 receiving core, which would be very exciting, especially if we were to go with Williams at the number 1. I think realistically, I don't expect Neighbors or Odunze to be there at the 9. I think the way that it's looking right now, I would expect 4 quarterbacks to go in the first 10 picks, or at least from the, reading the tea leaves, it seems like there's going to be 4 quarterbacks taken in the first 10 picks. Hopefully if Alt and Olu Fashanu from Penn State can get drafted there, that'd be 8 picks that aren't receivers, or 8 picks that aren't Neighbors, and that would be 6 picks that aren't Neighbors or Odunze. Harrison goes within the top 10, that's 7 picks. So then we would need another either lineman or another edge rusher to go before we take Neighbors or Odunze. So I think, if 4 quarterbacks do end up going in the first 10 picks, I think we could get there is a path for us to get one of these players. So again, that would be exciting, but I don't know if it's the most pressing need that we would have.
It would be exciting though. Having the best receiving room in the NFL is something the Bears maybe have never had. I was reading an article about past Bears, and they talked about the 2013 season, where we actually had the second best offense in the NFL, where we had Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey, Matt Forte, Martellus Bennett, and then Jay Cutler. And I think we had, we were putting up 30 or 40 or 25 a game. I think we still finished 7-10 or 8-8 because our defense was horrendous, but an exciting possibility. So that is the first option, talking about wide receivers. Now, the second option, and probably the more reserved or more realistic option now that we've signed at Keenan Allen, might be going after an offensive tackle. As Connor hit on before, the 2 top offensive tackles are Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu. Olu Fashanu for Penn State and Joe Alt for Notre Dame. Joe Alt seems, if he's at the 9, I feel like that'd be crazy value. He seems a it seems like he's going to be the first tackle taken off the board. Actually, didn't know this. He's a former tight end, 6'8", moves like a tight end, crazy athletic, crazy fast, absolute monster. And then Olu Fashanu, another stud lineman. I think those two would be, if we get them at 9, be great value. But then there's also Talisa.
Here we go.
Wow. Oh, no, I watched a video on this guy to know it's Talise Fuega, right? I think.
Hell yeah.
Fuega.
Yeah, you got it, man.
From Oregon State, who's another stud lineman. It's always hard for me to evaluate linemen. I watched a 3-minute breakdown on them, and they seem awesome. But I think for a quarterback like Caleb Williams, bringing someone in young, having an awesome a line would never hurt, and building a stud front five would be something I would not complain about. So the appeal of having one of these players fall to us, super exciting, super exciting. Less exciting than a receiver, but I would still be happy with one of these moves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, drafting linemen always not the sexy pick. It's usually having a hard time coming up with an analogy right now, but it's usually the correct decision. I think to talk about Olu, he was a guy that last year, he was a junior last year, and he kind of had a surprise return back to Penn State, I guess in hopes of winning a championship, which is hilarious at Penn State. But that did not happen. But he was a guy who would have been probably the first or second lineman taken in last year's draft. But then to come in with a draft with Joe Alt is pretty tough. But I think all three of these guys are pretty talented linemen. Again, Alt and Olu, I feel like being a little bit ahead of this Oregon State product. But I think either of these guys would be able to fit in as a franchise left tackle, really bookending with Darnell Wright and the rest of our line. So it really comes down to Poles' evaluation of Braxton Jones. Braxton Jones, 5th-round pick. He's a guy who's produced incredibly well for being a 5th-round pick. So it kind of depends on where Poles sees the rest of our roster going. If he feels like that's a hole that we need to fill more than other holes, and I could see that, and maybe we could bump Braxton inside. I could see I would be okay if we were to take either of these two players.
Gotta be nice. It'd be exciting. Yeah, and Ryan Poles, former lineman, so I'm sure his evaluation process of a lineman is a little more, I like to believe he has a little more going on, a little more knowledge. Oh, that's a good question. What is an analogy for drafting a lineman instead of a receiver? I mean, it's like buying a Camry instead of a truck or instead of a Jeep, right? The Jeep, is going to break down. It might break down. It's cool. It's fancy, but it's not as reliable as the Camry.
Great analogy.
That's my analogy.
Great analogy.
Okay. So, OT at 9. I think I've been seeing mock drafts that there's a potential. I believe the Jets do not have. I don't think they're not 1 through 8, correct? Because the 5 belongs to the Chargers right now. So
yes.
So I've been seeing a lot of mock drafts where the Jets trade, or that just in general, that Chargers 5th getting traded to a team that either wants to go up and snag McCarthy or a team that wants to get Alt or Olu. So we'll see. And of course, it's exciting if those two linemen get taken beforehand, then there's a pretty good shot that we could end up with Odunze or Neighbors. But
that's certainly interesting. I feel like this draft, our 9 is really going to come down to McCarthy as a whole, because I feel like Williams, May, and Daniels are seen as the top 3 quarterbacks, at least as of now. The period between now and the draft is often the time when no new tape is being created for these college players. That's when there's a ton of movement. I feel like we saw Zach Wilson go from a 2nd-round pick all the way to the 2nd overall pick, where Trey Lance also has these meteoric rises. So who knows what people see in J.J. McCarthy. I think he is a talented quarterback. Didn't have the opportunity to really produce at Michigan. Obviously is a winner and can win football games. But if he's taken within the top 10, I really do think that opens the door for the Bears to get one of those stud pass catchers. I would expect one of those linemen to go within the top 10. But I think, as you mentioned, that 5th pick, the Chargers pick, a lot of projected trades there. A lot of people think that the Vikings would be a prime team to trade up within the top 10, just with the departure of Kirk Cousins and the, acquisition of Sam Darnold. Not a franchise quarterback right there. So still definitely a QB room that needs someone talented that can play, especially with Justin Jefferson there. I assume he's not thrilled about the Sam Darnold move. So I would expect them to be a team that, could at least start barking up the tree. They already got a first-round pick recently trading with the Texans to get the 23rd overall pick, but I do think that they could still be a team that could trade into that top 10.
Absolutely. God, that'd be fun to have McCarthy and Williams in the same division, or two rookie quarterbacks in the same division. Yeah. That'd be exciting. Okay, so let's move on to the third option with that 9, with that pick, which would be addressing the defensive needs of either our edge or some D linemen. There's three really good edges. I was also doing some scouting this morning. Always hard for me to evaluate a lineman when you're looking at, or an edge rusher when you're looking at highlights. But the top 3 seem to be Jared Verse from Florida State, Laiatu Latu from UCLA, and then Dallas Turner from Alabama. Laiatu Latu, did not know, used to play for Washington, had what people thought a career-ending neck injury, was out for 2 years, and then came back and started playing and is now projected first-round draft pick. I mean,
pretty inspiring.
Heck of a story, yeah. But I feel like I've been hearing a lot about Dallas Turner being that guy at the 9. I don't know if it's maybe just because he's at Alabama and that's people think of Will Anderson, but reading his draft profile seems like he's got still some work to do, seems a little unpolished. All 3 of these guys seem a little unpolished. I guess that's what you expect with a rookie. Seems like Dallas Turner, or honestly, all 3 of these guys rely on a lot of their athleticism and would need to bulk up. The term I heard a lot was getting stonewalled by bigger offensive linemen. But I would be excited. Pairing someone up against Montez Sweat alongside Sweat on the other side would be awesome. Really address the holes we have at edge and would really, really bolster up this defensive line that, other than Sweat, I think is a little lacking.
Yeah, I agree. I think all 3 of these guys, not the same. There's not the same type of prospect as like Will Anderson last year. Again, Dallas Turner, coming off the heels of Will Anderson, definitely is a guy who's getting a lot of attention. I know Will Anderson, I'm pretty sure he had a comment saying that Dallas Turner, where he's at now, is at a better spot than Will Anderson was when he was his age. So, whatever that means, like, I don't know if that's something Ryan Poles is, scribbling in his notepad or something, but something to think about. But yeah, I think all 3 of these guys would be cool. I think for Latu from UCLA, his physical is still pretty important just because of his neck injury. People evaluating him, trying to figure out his long-term abilities. But he's a guy who was able to play last year at a super high level, had a good Senior Bowl as well. I think he'd be a guy that I would be excited about us taking. All 3 of these guys would be solid. I think Jared, is it Verse or Verse? Is it Verse?
I was seeing funny titles that used verse, like verse. I don't know. I'm reading Verse.
Cool story. He came from Albany, he played at FCS Albany school, which played in an FCS school and then was able to transfer to FSU, turn into a top pick in the draft. I remember starting when we started to look at the NFL draft last year, he was a guy that was projected to be the number 1 edge rusher before Dallas Turner came up. Really cool story for a guy to make that transition. One note on Dallas Turner, he famously had a crazy late hit on Jaden Daniels, so something to note about. He's a guy who's not afraid to get a little dirty, lay some wood. So especially if Jaden Daniels was to enter the NFC, either through through the Vikings, that'd be a kind of interesting storyline to follow. But Dallas Turner was a guy who ran well. Latu ran well too. I think all of these guys would be good positional players.
Yeah. Latu wears a neck pad, or at least in some of the highlights, he wears a neck pad, which I think could always use that on the team. That really swags up the defense. It's something you see in older. It's like a Dick Butkus era football move. I think we could use some of that. Some of that grime. Oh yeah. And then I think the last player that I'm going to mention for potential pick at the 9 would be Byron Murphy, defensive tackle for Texas. Number 90 on Texas. Seems like a monster. It's crazy athletic. Would be, I think, a 3 technique. Seems like, I think our defensive line is something that we seem to always struggle with after we lost Hicks. Can't say I know too much about defensive line scouting, but highlight tape looked good. Seems like he still has problems with, apparently his arms. Seem like his arm length might be a struggle. He doesn't know how to use his arms. Either they're too short or he doesn't know how to use them correctly. That was a draft profile read I saw. If I was interesting, I feel like these players.
Did the report say he either has too short of arms or he doesn't know how to use them, or is that your interpretation?
It was a video breakdown of him, and I think the report said short arms, but this guy's interpretation was maybe he just doesn't know how to use them correctly.
Okay, gotcha.
So maybe he needs to. Maybe our defensive coach can really teach him how to take those arms out, kick those arms out, give him a little longer. So after that, I think we're going to move to a fourth option. But are there any, which would be drafting down, but are there any other players, Connor, at 9 that you would be excited if we took?
Yeah, for sure. I think the last player that would be interesting, at least interesting to look at, would be Brock Bowers. We just saw that we signed somebody, Gerald Everett, to be the tight end 2. Waldron does like to use the tight end 2 position. Can't pretend that Gerald Everett is better than Brock Bowers, at least as a prospect. So Brock Bowers would come in and be an instant upgrade at that tight end 2 position and could start, could arguably compete with Cole Kmet. I feel like, again, that would be more of a luxury pick there. But I think as a whole, if I were to rank these positions as likelihood, I think I would put offensive tackle probably as the least likely, at least in my opinion, of what would happen. I think I would put edge rusher as the number 1 most likely to happen, and then wide receiver at the 2. I think in general, I think Poles is going to go best player available here. So if Neighbors or Odunze is there, I think that's the pick. But I think if both of those guys are gone, I would say that you would give the edge to the edge position. How about that? And take one of these 3 guys here. But I think Poles has had a history of taking best player available, like taking Quan in the second round in his first draft. I think he likes going BPA. But I wouldn't expect. I would expect any of these positions to be as likely, but I would say offensive tackle may be the least likely to get selected.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it's hard offensive tackle and receiver because receiver seems more dependent on what the rest of the draft is going to look like in that middle, the first 8 picks. If someone goes up, sneaks out and snags a QB or something. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I think that leads us next to the fourth final option right now we have, which would be trading down from the 9 to acquire more draft capital. This is a Ryan Poles signature, loves doing this. And as we said before, we only have 4 picks right now in the draft. So it could make sense that if we feel confident about a guy that we can snag later in the draft, that we'll move back a couple spots to acquire and start building on picks. If you remember last year, we actually traded back from the 9 to the 10 with the Eagles, who I guess ended up taking Jalen Carter, who ended up being
really
good. And, could we have just taken him and it'd probably be pretty good? Yes, but still seems like a move that we could do. I saw one article that was really interesting and hopeful. Talked about how this draft could potentially be the last time the Bears are in the top 10 draft for a while. Hopefully. I mean, we all hope that, right? So the idea that why should we trade out? Because it's going to be our last, it's probably our last chance in the top 10 in the next, 20, 30, 40 years. So we might as well
picking
draft
32 every time.
Yeah, so we might as well pick someone at the 9, which I thought, it's fun to think about. But, just in general, I think it would make sense. It's kind of hard to project what trading back would be. But I think if Poles, it seems something that he could do because he's done it in the past.
Yeah. I think for sure if one of those 2 receivers are not there, I would expect Poles to trade back. I think that the teardrop between those 2 receivers and then taking one of those linemen or the edge rushers, I think the gap between those 2 receivers and then the remaining receivers is a lot bigger than, Dallas Turner to Jared Verse or Latu or, the same thing for all 3 of those linemen. So I feel like there's not as much of a drop-off between those positions. So I would expect Poles to trade back from the 9, especially with the limited draft capital that we have, somewhere to the mid-teens. And see where he goes from there. But yeah, he's a guy who trades back pretty consistently. He traded back twice, I think, last year and 4 times the first year. In both drafts, we've had 10-plus draft picks, despite, starting with not 10 draft picks. So with our 4 draft picks right now, I think he's going to try to look to maximize the draft capital that we have. He keeps hitting on how he wants to build through the draft, and I think acquiring young talent is never a bad thing, and I think it's something that he might look to do here, especially if Neighbors and Odunze are gone. I would expect him to trade back at the 9.
Yeah, that's a great point, too. I feel like certainly if the 2 top 3 receivers are gone, that would mean, let's see, let's mock this out real quick. Okay, Bears.
There we go.
Williams, Manders, Drake May. Patriots, Jane Daniels. Cardinals, Martin Harrison. Chargers, this would be probably a receiver pick. So that would be maybe Neighbors. Let's say Giants, they would also take Odunze. Okay, so then Titans. I think Titans, they seem mocked to take a lineman. But then, okay, that would essentially leave us Olu, maybe Fuega, the 3 or 4 defensive players, and somebody else, or like Brock Bowers. So yeah, like you're saying, there are a lot more positions that we could do with that 9. Or if we moved back from the 9, there would still be at least one of those players still available. That would all be great for our team if we move back a couple spots. Obviously, I wouldn't want us to move. Probably honestly wouldn't want us to move outside the top. Oh, God. If we went past the 15th, that'd be very disappointing. I would not love that unless we got some crazy value. But I think, like you were saying, there's still a drop-off after those 2 receivers and then maybe after Alt or Olu. So, but yeah, I'm excited. Regardless, I am very excited. I think this has the potential to be, just this whole offseason, one of the most defining in Bears history, with the potential of Caleb Williams, with this draft capital that we have, with the future implications it could have. Very, very exciting time to be a Chicago's Bears fan. Okay, so I think that just about does it for all of the potential draft analysis, all the different options. We covered 4 realistic options the Bears could do with that 9th, assuming we're taking Caleb Williams. And then if we trade that first pick, we might have to make another. Just get on this pod, hop on the pod again to record.
Nightmare mode.
Yeah, just to break down what the heck just went on. But that is all I have for you guys today. Connor, you have anything else to add, or we wanna wrap this up?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Got nothing else to say. Bear down, baby.
Okay, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for listening to another episode of this podcast. We appreciate your viewership up until the end, and we hope you guys have a great day. Bear down, baby.
Bear down.
Yow.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Monday Morning Meatballs Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform to never miss another episode of the Monday Morning Meatballs. And be sure to leave us a review. Have a meatball sports take you'd like to share with the world? We'd love to hear it. Email us at mondaymorningmeatballspod@gmail.com and follow us on Twitter at mondaymorningmeatballspod.